Welcome to Invitation to the Dance. This is an exhibition of roughly 70 pictures in 4 sections. The portraits begin with Louis XIV of France, as it was during his reign that ballet changed from being a huge spectacle for the court alone to something performed on a stage. In 1661 he established the first ballet school, possibly as he was surrounded by some of the most talented teachers, musicians and dancers of his and arguably any time. He could rely on the musical genius of Lully, Molière and the talented ballet tutor Pierre Beauchamp, who was the first man to teach the 5 ballet positions still taught today.
Now Kate, who's Andrea's daughter, is going to demonstrate the 5 ballet positions.
So, the first position is would have been like this. However, nowadays the first position is much more turned out, so much flatter. If you want to see the difference from the side, so this would have been a first position during Louis XIV's reign, and this is how a first position would look like nowadays. Second position is first position, but it's more open, and again the feet would be pointing at a kind of 45-degree angle, whereas now it's a 90-degree angle. Third position is like the first position, but with the feet crossed. So this is what it would look like from the front and from the side. And then fourth position is third position, but opened. So that's what fourth position would look like from the front. You do have fourth position open and fourth position crossed. And this is what it would look like from the side. Nowadays, fourth position would be flat. And finally, fifth position, back then would have been similar to third position, but more crossed. And fifth position from the side would have been like this. However, nowadays, fifth position is flat.
Okay, thank you.
Court, its fashions and importantly etiquette informed the rules of ballet, but it gradually adapted. The first notable ballerinas were held back by more than just talent. They wore only slightly adapted court dress, assisted by iron and later whalebone corsets, which held the torso, pelvis and tops of their thighs virtually rigid. Her tight bodice meant her arms could hardly move at all, and she had overskirts, trains, brocade, jewels, fringes, puffs and paddings. She also had to hold her head up and body erect, and the wig and hat alone could wear as much as she did. Only her feet and lower arms could do much at all. Her daily bowing at court was used at each encounter. She must stand in first position, feet turned out, plié. The grander the person, the lower the plié, and nothing must wobble. Her eyes should gently lower at the same rate as the knees. The chassé then developed.
Under the person she met, the lower plie. Kate's going to show us a plie. First one for somebody who's not so important, and then somebody who's more important.
If you want to look, so my feet are on a show. First position the heels wouldn't have touched. It would have been slightly more open. Again, feet at a 45-degree angle, and a plie would involve just bending the knees slightly. And the more important the person, the deeper the plie. So, seeing your friend, it would just be a tiny plie. And if you're meeting the Queen, you could be required to go all the way down. And you weren't allowed to come up until you were given a sign, so you could have been staying here like this until the Queen wanted. And nothing would move apart from your eyes. And as you came up, slowly your eyes would come up at the same time.
Okay. The chassé, which Kate will demonstrate now, developed from passing another lady and then was taken into fourth position.
So, again, looking at my feet, a chassé involves, if I step maybe backwards you can see my feet. A chassé involves sliding. So, and it would always be going to the side. The chassés weren't done travelling forwards. So in fourth position, like I showed before, they would be going to the side. And you could do up to 8 chassés in a corridor followed by 2 pliés if required if you met someone along the way.
Men were to stand still at all times if they were not speaking, and should stand in either third or fourth position. Anything else was noted as vulgar. Okay, it's going to show third and fourth position.
Stand back as far as possible so you can see my feet. So, third position is before, heel touching instep of the foot behind. Fourth position slightly opened. And both would be kind of 45 degree angles.
Thank you very much. Now,
The second position was devised so that the male dancer could move sideways whilst not turning his back on the king. They must stand still in third or fourth position, anything else was vulgar, and not raise their arms above their shoulders, as only the street performers did this, and it was beneath the dignity of court.
How far a corset came down for the women. I'm going to show you with a piece of ribbon. It would come all the way down lower than the hips to about here. So, and it would be very, very tight. So all movement was really restricted, and any dance moves were very difficult to do. Really, you couldn't open your legs much more than this. So that's why knees were used, and the emphasis was on the arms, head, and shoulders. However, the men would have done 90-degree and 180-degree turns. They would have kept their arms either to the side or down, and the foot would have probably lifted to what we call coup de pied. It would have looks a bit like this.
great. Thank you very much, Kate.
The arabesques would have been very, very low. They probably would have come just about there off the floor, and arms would have been very relaxed, probably turned or low. So, and it would maybe go in from a chassé. So the arms would be quite low, around this height, maybe turned, and the foot would have been flat. It later would have gone on to demi-point and then full point.
Okay. The emphasis was...
D'Action saw a marked change and threw Louis Dupre into the limelight. He became known as the first god of the dance. He dropped his mask so he could be recognised, but he was very tall, wore a 6-foot wig and stood. Marie Camargo and her only real rival, London-born Mary Saleh, made their mark. Camargo shortened her skirt, copied the men's steps in high-heeled shoes, wobbly, silk, and incorporated an arabesque, pirouette, and all on demi-point. They matched her, but was sacked from the opera when she threw off her panniers and went on stage in just a muslin dress, leaving little to the imagination. She didn't miss Paris, as London welcomed her with opened arms and jaws. And son Gaetano and Auguste Vestri were the second and third gods of the dance, bringing more impressive height to jumps and increasing the number of pirouettes. Gaetano performed an entrechaussée at 60 at his grandson's first stage performance.
A double pirouette would have either happened from 5th, possibly 3rd, or maybe 4th position. Something like this. And an entrechat involves beating the feet in the air. So an entrechat cat is going to the front and to the back, closing like this. And an entrechat cease involves in the air going to the back, to the front, and to the back before closing. Something like this. You can have entrechaussée, which involves going front, back, before closing.
Thank you very much.
Authenticity was what people now wanted. The old court modesty had all but gone. Rose Diderot and Maria Vigano flew across the stage on strings and ropes in floating dresses clinging to their bodies, which curiously made ballet ever more popular. Behind the flying contraptions was Salvatore Vigano, a talented dancer and choreographer with an inventive mind and a daring wife. of the Romantic era was epitomised by Maria Taglioni, Queen of Paris Opera, who became famous throughout Europe. Fanny Elssler was her only near rival, and after fighting with the fierce Taglioni, took ballet down a different route, studying instead folk dances and cleverly working them into the ballet stories. Both Giselle and La Fumagalli.
It was to give the illusion that the dancer was half dead a lot of the time, or dead. So it was mainly the arms that gave this illusion, kind of floating arms. There would have been a few arabesques to the illusion of floating, of flying. Arms would have been very low, like low arms like Giselle. Lots of port de bras. Maybe a few turns. It was all very, very soft, low, slow, elongated movements. The legs were used in coordination with the arms, sometimes lifting up, but it was all very neat and small and slow.
Thank you very much.
The point shoes wouldn't have been used in the character dances, but I don't have character shoes, and I will be using my point shoes afterwards, so that's why I've got them on. Character dances were used for the peasant dancers in the story, and they were usually very jolly, into the floor. Heels were used, clicking a lot. So you'd have kind of chasses, if you're doing berserker, for example, or clicking in the air. And it was all usually hand on a hip, a flexed foot, down to the floor, up, clicks, lots of clicking the heels together. Usually a lot of people would be dancing it at the same time.
Thank you very much.
Perrault and Arthur St. Leon were really the only men holding their own during the Romantic era, both great choreographers, and between them married to or lived with all of the great dancers, Taglioni, Elssler, Srito, Gran and Grisi. Perrault, who is the Degas dance teacher in the famous painting of the ballet class in the Paris Opera, famously got 4 of the 5 to appear together for a royal performance in 1845 in London. The backstage fights became legend. The only way he could persuade them to dance without one taking obvious precedence was to insist they arrive on stage in order of age.
The arabesque.
So I put on a classical tutu. Probably looks quite familiar. Tutus do vary, but this is roughly what most tutus look like. I've got point shoes on. Point shoes allow you to go up onto your toes. And the ballet d'action ballet russe would have had, like Tim said, very high arabesques, usually on point, and they would have had much sharper, bigger movements. So you'd have a lot more on point, you'd have higher legs, so something like this. Arms would have been bigger, feet would have been faster, and jumps would have been higher. These are quite typical Giselle jumps, whereas ballet d'action would probably take it to a much bigger size. Retires were used a lot. Retires involve, not always on point, but the foot coming up to the knee. So you would have had things like piqués. Oops, a bit slippy. I won't do it sliding. But a piqué involves going over onto one leg, lifting the other up. You would have had pirouettes done in a piqué position. And in general, it was just a lot more overwhelming and incredible.
Russians began to seriously dominate ballet by the 1860s, as the foreign choreographers and dancers flocked to their beautiful stages and adoring audiences. Technique became tighter and ever more accomplished. costumes shorter made from flexible materials which allowed freer movement and ever more impressive jumps and spins. There were a few dancers taking ballet in different directions at the turn of the 20th century. Isadora Duncan was encouraging freedom of movement at outside impromptu performances, often in bare feet, and she set up schools in both Europe and America, whereas Genet was insisting on a tighter, cleaner technique and started what was to become the Royal Academy of Dance. But the big noise was being made by Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. Artists of a level never seen before were collected together for the delight of an awestruck public. They left their audiences rioting and their mark on the 20th century. Most eminent choreographers, teachers and dancers of the post-war period were taught in or by a Ballet Russe. Pavlova went it alone after just 18 months, and she could stand Diaghilev for only so long. He brought together something quite brilliant that has never been topped for excitement, collaboration, and sheer brilliance.